St. Adler Regional was the kind of hospital that ran on routine. The floors were old but clean, the elevators slow, the coffee in the third-floor lounge perpetually burnt. The people who worked there had learned the building the way you learn an old house, by the sound of a particular door, the flicker of a particular light, the place where the hallway turned cold in winter no matter how high they set the heat. Dana Royce had been there 11 days. She was 34, though something in the way she carried herself made her age hard to guess. She wore her hair pulled back so tight it looked like it might hurt. She spoke quietly, when she spoke at all, and she never spoke first. In the surgical wing she was the new trainee, the extra set of hands, the one who restocked carts and counted instruments and stood at the edge of the room while the people who mattered worked. Royce. Cause. Cabinets empty in two. That was Masha Quill, the charge nurse, who said everything as if it were the last thing she would ever have time to say. Dana moved without a word, retrieving the gauze, sliding the cabinet closed with the flat of her hand so it wouldn't bang. And the trays in 3 are wrong, Masha added, already turning away. Whoever set those up doesn't know a hemostat from a hole in the ground. Dana had set up those trays. She didn't correct her. She went and fixed what wasn't broken, because that was easier than the conversation. The others had decided about her quickly, the way busy people do. Dr. Aldous Penn, the senior surgeon, called her the new girl and never her name. The younger nurses found her hard to talk to. She didn't gossip, didn't complain, didn't laugh at the things that were supposed to be funny. There was a politeness to her that felt like a closed door. People stopped knocking. What none of them noticed was the way she watched. When Dana entered a room, her eyes moved first to the exits. She did it without thinking, the way other people checked their phones. 2 doors in or 3, one to the scrub corridor, one to the recovery hall. A supply closet that locked from the inside. A window that didn't open. She knew the cabinet that held the heavy retractors weighed more on its left side and would tip if you pulled the top drawer too far. She knew which floor tiles were loose. She knew how long it took to cross the room at a walk and how long at a run, and the difference mattered to her in a way it would not have mattered to anyone else on the staff. She watched hands, too. Always the hands. When a man came into the waiting area, she clocked what he was carrying, where his weight sat, whether his fingers were loose or tight. It was not suspicion exactly. It was closer to breathing. She had spent a long time somewhere that had wired it into her, and that somewhere did not come up in conversation, and she preferred it that way. "You're very calm," a young nurse named Priya had said to her once, the first week, in the break room. It had been meant kindly. Dana had looked up from her coffee. "Long shifts," she said. "You learned to save it." Priya had nodded as if that explained everything, and it had explained nothing, and Dana had let her believe it. There was a photograph nobody saw, folded in the back of Dana's locker behind a spare scrub top. Not a face, just a strip of desert horizon, the kind of nothing landscape you'd only keep if it meant something. She didn't look at it. She just knew it was there. The 11th day was a Tuesday. Outside, a gray sky pressed down on the parking structure and the ambulance bay and the long flat roof of the surgical wing. Inside, the heart monitors kept their steady rhythm, and Dr. Penn opened a chest in or 3, and Dana restocked a cart in the corner, quiet and overlooked and exactly where she had arranged to be. It was an ordinary morning. The last one the wing would have for a while. The first wrong thing was the fire door. It was at the end of the surgical corridor, the one that led to the back stairwell, and it was supposed to stay shut and latched. Dana passed it on her way to Central Supply at 9:40 and found it propped with a rubber wedge, the kind the cleaning crews used. She stopped. She looked at it for a moment longer than the door deserved. Then she pulled the wedge free with her foot and let the door swing closed, and she heard the latch catch, and she kept walking. By itself, it was nothing. A propped door in a hospital is the most ordinary thing in the world. But Dana had learned a long time ago that things came in patterns, and that the trick was not to react to the first wrong thing but to remember it, to set it down on a shelf in the back of your mind and wait to see if it had company. It had company. At 10:15, the badge reader on the surgical wing's main entrance stopped working. Maintenance was called. A man in a gray uniform came and crouched in front of the panel and worked at it for 20 minutes and then propped that door open too, with a chair, just till the part comes in. Now both ends of the corridor were open. Dana noticed. She didn't say anything, because what was there to say? The door's broken, fix the door, but she felt the shelf in the back of her mind grow heavier. At 10:40, she heard the argument. It came from down by the ICU, 2 halls over, and it carried the way distress always carries through a quiet building. A man's voice, climbing. A security guard's voice, flat and tired, trying to bring it down. Dana drifted close enough to see without being part of it. The man was big. Not gym big, work big, the kind of size that came from doing something heavy for a living. He had a gray jacket and a face gone red and wet, and he was saying a name over and over, a man's name, and asking where they had taken him. "Sir, I need you to step back from the desk." "Where is he?" "You tell me where he is." "Sir." The guard got him moving, eventually, walked him back toward the elevators with a hand not quite touching his shoulder. The man went. But at the elevator he turned and looked back down the hall, and Dana, standing at the edge of it, saw his eyes pass over the corridor the way her own eyes passed over rooms, not seeing the people, seeing the building. Seeing the way out and the way back in. She set that down on the shelf too. She found Marcia at the central station. "The man at the ICU desk," Dana said. "Is anybody following up on him?" Marcia didn't look up from her screen. "He's gone. Eddie walked him out." "He didn't leave," Dana said. Now Marcia looked up. "What?" "He went to the elevator." "He didn't get in one." Dana kept her voice level, ordinary, the voice you'd use to mention the weather. "And the fire door at the end of our hall keeps getting propped. And the main badge reader's down." Marcia studied her for a second, and Dana watched her decide that the new girl was nervous, that this was the kind of thing nervous new people did, finding shapes in clouds. "It's a hospital, Royce," she said, not unkindly. "Doors break. People are upset. That's Tuesday." She turned back to her screen. "Go check the trays in 3. Dana went and checked the trays in 3. But on the way she stopped at the supply closet, the one that locked from the inside, and she made sure the key was where it should be, on the hook, where she could reach it. And she moved the heavy retractor cabinet's top drawer in by 1/2 inch so it would sit square and not tip. And when she walked back into or 3, where Dr. Penn was still working over the open chest and the anesthesiologist was watching the numbers and the patient's heart kept its steady, oblivious rhythm, Dana did not go back to the corner. She stood near the door instead. She told herself it was so she could hear if she was called. That was not the reason, and some part of her knew it. The shelf in the back of her mind was full now, and full meant something, and she had stopped being able to pretend it didn't. The clock on the wall read 10:53. It started with the sound of running. Not the busy, purposeful jog of staff responding to a code. Dana knew that sound. Everyone in the building knew that sound. This was different. This was panic, bare and uneven, feet that didn't know where they were going, and underneath it a voice raised in a register that human voices only reach when something has gone very wrong. Then the screaming started, and then the first shot. It was a flat, hard crack, smaller and uglier than the movies make it, and it came from the direction of the propped main door. In or 3, every head came up at once. Dr. Penn's gloved hands stopped over the open chest. The anesthesiologist, a quiet man named Robert Cho, went white and looked at the door. Priya, who was assisting, made a small sound and stepped backward into a tray stand. "Stay on the patient," Dana said. She didn't say it loudly. She didn't say it like a trainee. She said it the way you say something you have said before, in worse rooms, and for a half-second the authority of it held them all in place, Penn included, Penn who had never once called her by name. Then the doors burst open. The man from the ICU filled them, bigger up close, the gray jacket gone, sleeves shoved up, blood on his forearm that Dana could see at a glance was not his. In his right hand he held a pistol, and the pistol was shaking, and a shaking gun is in some ways the most dangerous gun there is, because a shaking gun belongs to a man who has lost the thread of himself. His eyes swept the room and found the table, found the patient, and something in his ruined face twisted toward a terrible relief. "That's him," he said. "That's him on the table. You don't touch him. Nobody touch him." The name he had been shouting at the ICU desk, Dana understood it now. The patient under Penn's hands was the man this stranger had come to find. She did not yet know why. The why did not matter in this first half-minute. What mattered was the geometry of the room and the state of the man holding the gun, and Dana was already reading both. Distance, 9 feet from the doors to the table, 11 to where she stood. The man's weight was forward, on the balls of his feet, but his shoulders were high and locked, a body running on adrenaline and grief, not training. His grip on the pistol was a fist, not a hold. He had the trigger but not the weapon. His finger was on it. That was bad. His eyes were everywhere. The table, the staff, the monitors, the door behind him. And a man whose eyes are everywhere is a man whose attention can be moved. Out, the man said. Everybody out except, no, nobody out. Doors. Get away from the doors. Priya took a step. The gun jerked toward her and she froze, and Cho made a sound, and Penn said, "Easy, easy, we're not." In the placating voice doctors use that works on patients and would not work on this. Dana did not move toward the door and did not move away from it. She kept her hands loose and visible at her sides, palms slightly out, and she lowered her chin a fraction, making herself smaller, less, no threat at all. The new girl, the quiet one, the nobody in the corner. She let the man's panicked eyes pass over her and dismiss her the way everyone in this building had dismissed her for 11 days. Then, low and even, in the voice you'd use to talk a frightened animal down off a ledge, she said, "There's a patient on that table with his chest open. If everybody stays calm, nobody else gets hurt. Including him." A small pause. "Including you." The gun stayed up. But the man's eyes came to her and stayed, just for a moment, and that was the first thing she had wanted. She had his attention now. And attention, she knew better than almost anyone alive, was a thing that could be spent. The clock read 10:56. Somewhere far below, an alarm had begun to sound, thin and distant, and the building had started, too slowly, to understand what was happening inside it. The next 90 seconds would decide everything, and Dana spent them doing almost nothing at all. She knew the math. The gun held more rounds than there were lives in the room. The man was 9 feet away, which was both very close and impossibly far. Close enough that he could not miss, far enough that no one could cross it before he fired. There was no version of the next minute where she moved fast and won. Speed was the amateur's answer, and the man with the gun was the amateur. Her answer had to be something else. So she talked. "My name's Dana," she said. "I'm one of the nurses. What's yours?" The man's jaw worked. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, and then, because grief wants to be heard, because that is the one thing grief always wants, he said, "Doesn't matter." "It matters to me," Dana said. "I'd rather not call you, sir, the whole time." A flicker. Almost nothing. But his shoulders dropped 1/8 of an inch, and Dana logged it the way she logged everything, and she kept her face open and her voice the same flat calm. "The man on the table," she said. "He's somebody to you. He killed my brother." The words came out cracked. "Drunk. Ran the light. My brother. They brought my brother here 3 weeks ago and he died here, in this place, and they fixed him up and let him walk and now he's back. He's back here getting fixed again like he's worth." The gun rose. Penn flinched. "Like he's worth something." There it was. The whole shape of it, in 4 sentences. A man drowning in a grief that had curdled into the only thing that felt stronger than drowning. Dana had seen the type before, on different ground, in different uniforms, and she knew the one true thing about a man like this. He had not come here to shoot a room full of strangers. He had come here for one death, and everything else in the room was an obstacle his rage hadn't planned for. That was a weakness. It was also, if she was careful, a door. "Okay," Dana said. "Okay. I hear you. Don't," his voice broke. "Don't okay me like I'm crazy. I don't think you're crazy." She let a beat pass. "I think your brother died and the man who did it is lying right there breathing and the whole world told you to be reasonable about that. That's not crazy. That's just more than a person should have to carry." The gun lowered. Not far, 2 inches, but 2 inches was the most honest thing that had happened in the room since the doors blew open. Behind her, Dana was aware of Cho's eyes on the monitors, of the patient's exposed heart still beating under the lights, of Penn frozen with his hands held up and away. She was aware of all of it the way she was aware of the exits, a full map held without effort in the back of her mind. And as she talked, she had begun, very slightly, to move. Not toward him. Never toward him. That would trip the wire. She moved across, a half step at a time, the kind of small weight shifts a nervous person makes, drifting by inches toward the foot of the operating table. Each step put her body a little more between the gun and the open chest. Each step changed the angle so that if he fired at the patient now, he would have to fire through her, and a grieving man who has come to kill a stranger does not, in the first minutes, want to kill the kind woman who said his grief was more than a person should carry. It was the move that gave her away, to the one person in the room who had the eyes to see it. Robert Cho had served once, a long time before medicine, a year and a half he didn't talk about, in a place he didn't name. And watching the trainee nurse drift sideways across that floor, watching the geometry of her, the way her hands stayed loose and her feet stayed under her hips and her eyes never once dropped from the gunman's hands, Cho felt the hair rise on his arms. Because he had seen people move like that. Not nurses. Not anyone who learned it in a hospital. He said nothing. He held very still and he watched, and he understood, all at once, that the new girl in the corner was not what any of them had thought she was. "I want you to do something for me," Dana said to the gunman, gently, drifting one more inch. "I want you to take your finger off the trigger. Just rest it along the side. You can keep the gun. Just your finger. So nothing happens that you didn't choose." The clock read 10:58, and the man, for one suspended second, looked down at his own hand. He didn't move his finger. The second passed, and the man's grief hardened back over his face like ice reforming, and his finger stayed where it was, and Dana understood that talk alone was not going to be enough. It had bought her position and time and a map of his mind. It would not buy the gun. For that, she would need the room. So she went to work on the room. She did it the way you turn a key in a stiff lock, slowly, with feel, never forcing. Her voice stayed on the man, a low steady current of words that kept his eyes up and forward, and underneath that current she began to move the others. "Robert," she said, easy, conversational, the patient's pressure. "Tell me where we are." It sounded like a nurse keeping her surgeon informed. It was a command, and Cho heard it as one. He answered the number, and as he answered, Dana caught his eye for a quarter second and flicked her gaze, just barely, toward the supply closet door. Cho understood. He began, while he spoke, to shift his own weight off the line of fire and toward the wall, putting the heavy steel anesthesia cart between his body and the gun. "Priya." Dana didn't look at her. "I need you to step back to the cabinet behind you. Slowly. Keep your hands where he can see them. A breath. It's all right. You're allowed to be scared. Just go slow." Priya went slow. The gun twitched toward her once, and Dana pulled it back with her voice. "She's just moving away from you. That's all you wanted, right? People away from the doors." And the man let it happen, because it was what he'd asked for, and a man clings to the things he asked for when everything else is slipping. Inch by inch, Dana was emptying the line between the gunman and the patient of everyone but herself. She was building a room with one door left open, and she was the one standing in it. Inside her own skull, the calculations ran cold and clear. *9 feet. Reduce it without him feeling it reduced. The retractor cabinet is at my 4 o'clock. Top drawer sits square now, won't tip, but the second drawer holds the heavy bulfer, 1,100 grams, and it's at hand height. The closet key is on the hook 2 steps left. If the gun comes down to the table, he commits his eyes downward for half a second. That's the window. Half a second is enough if I'm inside 6 feet. I'm not inside 6 feet. Get inside 6 feet. She drifted. She talked. She closed the distance the way water closes over a stone, so gradually that the man, watching her face and not her feet, did not register that the kind nurse was now a single long stride from the muzzle of his gun. Penn saw it. Penn, who had called her the new girl for 11 days, watched her move and felt something cold and astonished open in his chest. He had operated beside Special Forces medics, years ago, in a trauma fellowship that had taken him somewhere he didn't advertise. He knew what it looked like when a person turned a room into a weapon without lifting a hand. He looked at the trainee nurse and he thought, with a clarity that frightened him, "I have had this woman fetching gauze." "You keep looking at the table," Dana said softly to the gunman. It was true. The man's eyes kept dropping to the patient, to the object of everything, the way a tongue keeps finding a broken tooth. Each time his eyes dropped, the gun's muzzle drifted a fraction offline. Dana was counting the rhythm of it. *1. He looks. 2. He comes back. 3. He looks. She was learning his clock. His name was Daniel. the man said suddenly. His brother. Daniel. Daniel, Dana repeated, and meant it, and used the half-second his face crumpled to take the last half-step she needed. She was inside 6 feet now. The man didn't know it. The clock read 11:01, and outside in the corridor she could hear, finally, the heavy, careful footsteps of the first responding officers staging at the corner, and she knew with absolute certainty that their arrival was about to make everything worse. A voice came down the corridor through a bullhorn, distorted and loud. This is the police. The building is surrounded. We need you to put the weapon down and come out with your hands visible. It was the worst possible thing they could have said, and they said it at the worst possible time. The man jerked as if struck. His head whipped toward the door, the gun swinging with it, and the fragile thing Dana had been building over 6 minutes, the slow trust, the lowered finger that never quite lowered, the man's eyes coming back to her again and again like she was the only steady point in a spinning world, all of it cracked down the middle. Because the bullhorn told him the truth he had been holding off, there was no version of this where he walked out. He had crossed a line he could not uncross. And a man with nothing left to lose is a different and far more dangerous animal than a man with one death in his heart. No, he said. No, there, you called them you. He swung back to Dana, and the gun came up, and now it was pointed not at the table but at her, at the kind nurse who had said his grief was more than a person should carry, and his face had gone to ruin. You kept me talking. You kept me here. I kept you alive, Dana said. She did not step back. Stepping back now would tell him she was afraid, and his whole collapsing mind was hunting for one solid thing to react to, and her fear would be that thing. She held still, palms out, 6 feet of air between her chest and the muzzle. Nobody outside that door knows your name or knows about Daniel. I do. As long as you're talking to me, you're a person. The second you stop, you're just a man with a gun to them. Don't give them that. It reached him. Barely. The gun stayed up, but the man stayed put, his breath sawing, his eyes flicking between Dana and the door. And then the patient began to die. It was Cho who saw it first, the numbers on the monitor sliding, the pressure dropping, the heart on the open table changing its rhythm to something ragged and wrong. 3 weeks ago, a drunk driver had walked away from a wreck that killed Daniel. Today that same body was failing on the table for reasons of its own, the long-delayed cost of an old injury finally come due. The monitor began to alarm, a high insistent tone, and Cho said, without thinking, in the pure reflex of a man whose whole life was keeping people alive, "He's crashing. Penn, he's crashing. I need you on him now." Everyone in the room understood the trap at the same instant. If they saved the man on the table, they were saving the man the gunman had come to kill, and the gunman was watching them do it. If they didn't, a human being died on the table in front of them while they stood and let it happen. There was no clean choice. There was only the alarm, screaming, and the gun, and the surgeon frozen between his oath and his fear, and the gunman's face twisting as he watched the people in the room move to rescue the one life he had come to take. "Stop," the man said. "Get away from him. Let him go. Let him." The gun jerked toward the table, toward the failing patient, toward Penn who had not yet moved. "Let him die. That's all I want. That's all I want." And Dana saw the whole geometry of it resolve into a single point. If the gun fired at the table, it killed a patient and maybe Penn behind him. If Penn moved to the patient, the gun fired. If no one moved, the patient died and the gunman won, and then, drowning in a grief now complete, he would very likely turn the gun on the room and then himself. Every path led through a body. She had spent 6 minutes making sure that if a path had to go through a body, it would go through hers. The clock read 11:03. Outside, she could hear the officers shifting, preparing to make entry, which would turn the room into a crossfire. She had seconds, not minutes. She had run out of words. She looked at the man one last time, at his ruined face, at Daniel's name still sitting in the air between them, and she felt the old cold thing settle over her that she had hoped never to feel again. Not anger, not fear, just the clarity, the terrible, familiar clarity of a person who knows exactly what the next 2 seconds require and exactly what they will cost. "Daniel wouldn't want this," she said quietly. "And neither do you." It was not meant to convince him. It was meant to drop his eyes. And it did. For half a second, at the sound of his brother's name, the man's gaze fell. Half a second. Inside 6 feet. The window opened. She moved. There was nothing graceful in it, nothing like the films. No spin, no flourish, no impossible speed. It was economy. It was the shortest possible line between her hand and the gun, traveled in the smallest possible time, by a body that had done this in places where getting it wrong meant not getting another chance. Her left hand came up and across, not for the man, not for his arm, but for the gun itself, for the slide, the top of it, her palm clamping down over the weapon and driving it down and offline, away from the table, away from herself, pinning it toward the floor. The same motion turned her body in behind it, hip into his hip, closing the last of the distance so there was no space left for the gun to be a gun. He fired. The shot went into the floor tiles 18 inches from her foot, deafening in the closed room, and a chip of tile bit into her ankle and she didn't feel it yet. He was bigger than her. Far bigger. Strength was his and she could not match it, so she did not try to. She used the gun as a lever and his own size as a weight, and she took him down the way water takes down a bank, by going where the structure was weakest, his locked knee, his forward weight, the panic that made his movements wide and uncoordinated. They went to the floor together, hard, and her shoulder took the corner of the retractor cabinet on the way down and something tore in it, hot and bright, and she logged the injury and set it aside the way she had been trained to set everything aside until it was over. On the floor it was close, ugly, brief. He was strong and she was trained, and over a long fight strength wins, so she did not let it be a long fight. She kept the gun pinned under the heel of her hand, his finger fouled outside the guard now, and with her other forearm she found the line of his jaw and his throat, and she put her weight where weight does the most and least at once, enough to take the air, enough to take the fight, not enough to take the life. Restraint, even here. Especially here. She had learned the difference between stopping a man and ending one in a place where the line between them was a daily decision, and she had decided, a long time ago, which side of it she wanted to live on. He bucked. She rode it. He clawed at her injured shoulder and found the torn place and dug, and she made a sound she could not stop and did not let it move her. Asterisk 3 seconds. Hold the 3. He's spending what he has. Don't spend yours. Asterisk his struggles slowed. The gun came loose under her palm and she cleared it, dropped the magazine, racked the slide, the round spinning away across the tile. 3 movements done without looking, the way you button a shirt, and the weapon was dead in her hand, and then it was sliding across the floor toward Cho, who stopped it with his foot. And then the man under her was only a man, sobbing, the fight gone out of him all at once, gone entirely, and what was left was just grief, the grief that had been there the whole time under the rage. She felt it go out of him, and she eased her weight off his throat the instant it was safe to, not a moment after, and she stayed there pinning his arm with her good hand, her body still between him and the rest of the room, her face an inch from his. "It's over," she said, quietly, just to him. "It's over. You're alive. Daniel's still gone, and that's not fair, and it's not going to stop being not fair. But you're alive, and nobody else got hurt, and that matters even though it doesn't feel like it." Her breath was ragged. Blood was running warm down her arm from the shoulder. "Stay down. Stay down. I've got you." The man wept into the floor tiles and did not fight her. The doors came open and the officers came through, shouting, and the room dissolved into the loud, bright chaos of an emergency ending. Hands everywhere, the man pulled from under her and cuffed, voices calling clear, clear, room clear. Dana let them take him. She sat back on the cold floor with her ruined shoulder and her bleeding ankle, and she looked at the operating table, where Penn, released at last from the trap, had already thrown himself back over the failing patient, hands moving, voice sharp, fighting for the life of the man the whole thing had been about. Save him, Dana thought, distantly, the clarity beginning to ebb and the pain beginning to arrive. Save him anyway. That's the whole point. That's the only point. She had been inside that room for 11 days as a nobody, and for 7 minutes as something else, and the cost of the 7 minutes was written now in her shoulder and her ankle and in the look on every face that turned toward her. She closed her eyes for just a moment. The clock read 11:04. It had taken less than 4 seconds, start to finish, the lunge, the gun, the floor, the choke that stopped short of a kill. The whole room had watched it, and almost no one had seen it. It was too fast and too plain. One moment the gunman was standing with a weapon up and the kind nurse 6 feet away, and the next he was face down on the tile, weeping and cuffed, and the gun was dead and disassembled across the floor, and the trainee was sitting against the cabinet bleeding. In the aftermath, in the loud confusion, that was when they understood. Not during. After. when there was time to look back at the 4 seconds and feel how impossible they should have been. Priya stood with her hand over her mouth. She had spent a week deciding Dana was cold and hard to talk to, and now she was looking at the woman who had just stood between a gun and every person in the room and taken it down with her hands, and the word cold rearranged itself in her mind into something else entirely. Pen worked the patient, and the patient held, the numbers crawling back from the edge, the old body deciding to keep going after all, and even as Pen worked, his eyes kept cutting to the floor where Dana sat. He had operated beside men who moved like that. He had never once imagined one of them restocking his carts. He thought of every time he had said, "the new girl," and the memory tasted like ash. It was Cho who said it out loud, because Cho had known the longest, had known since she first started drifting across the floor. He crouched beside her with a wad of gauze pressed to her shoulder, and under the noise of the room he said quietly, "Where'd you serve?" Dana didn't answer at first. She was watching the officers walk the gunman out, watching the man's bowed head and shaking shoulders, and there was no triumph anywhere on her face, only a kind of tired grief that mirrored, strangely, the man being led away. "You moved like someone who's done it for real," Cho said. "Not a class. Not a course. For real." He pressed the gauze. "I did 1.5 years, long time ago. I know what I'm looking at." Dana finally looked at him. For a moment something passed between them. The recognition of two people who have stood in the same kind of place and come back changed and learned to keep it folded behind the spare scrub top in the back of the locker. "Long enough," she said. "That was all. I served long enough." She didn't name the unit. She didn't name the years, the places, the things she had carried back. She would not to Cho, not to the police who were already setting up to take statements, not to the hospital administrators who would arrive within the hour with their grave faces and their careful questions. The strip of desert horizon folded in her locker would stay folded. Whatever she had been, and the way she had emptied that room, the way she had read the man and turned the geometry and closed 6 feet of air without him feeling it move, told its own story to anyone with the eyes to read it. She had no intention of putting it on display. A young officer came over, notebook out, and crouched down. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to ask you some questions." That was, I have to say, ma'am, that was about the bravest thing I've ever seen. Where does a nurse learn to do that? Dana looked at him. The room had gone quieter. People were listening, leaning in, hungry for the story, hungry to be told who she really was. "I didn't learn it as a nurse," she said. And then she said nothing else about it. She gave him the facts, the timeline, the man's words about his brother, the name Daniel, the request that they go easy on him because grief had driven him and not malice. She advocated for the man who had nearly killed her. She did not advocate for herself at all. The patient on the table lived. The gunman lived. Every person in or 3 lived, including the trainee nurse, who had decided 7 minutes earlier that if a path had to run through a body, it would run through hers, and had then made sure it didn't have to. The clock read 11:12. It was, by the measure that mattered most to her, a clean day. Nobody died. That was the only scoreboard she had ever cared about. They wanted to make it a story. That was the part Dana had known was coming, the part she dreaded more than the 4 seconds on the floor. The hospital's communications office found her within the day. There was talk of a press statement, of a local news segment, of the word hero deployed in a headline. An administrator named her in an all-staff email she did not consent to. For about 36 hours, Dana Royce was the most discussed person at St. Adler Regional, and she hated every minute of it with a quiet, exhausted intensity. She declined the news segment. She declined the photo. When the communications officer pressed, gently, then less gently, explaining how good this was for the hospital, how the community needed stories like this, Dana said, in the same flat calm she had used on the gunman, "Find a different story." And something in her voice closed the conversation the way it had closed conversations for 11 days, and the woman went away and did not come back. There was an investigation, because there is always an investigation. Dana sat in a small room and answered the questions, and at one point a man from the police looked at her file, at something in it that the rest of the staff would never see, and his eyebrows rose, and he closed the folder and looked at her differently and said, "You could have told us. When we set up outside. You could have identified yourself. We'd have worked with you. And you'd have changed how you came through that door," Dana said. "And he'd have seen it. And somebody dies." She shook her head, once. It worked because nobody knew. Including you. The man studied her, and then he did something small that no one else in the room noticed, and that meant more to Dana than any headline. He stood, and he straightened, and for half a second, out of an old habit from his own life before this one, he came to attention. Just briefly. Just enough. Then he sat back down and went on with his questions, and neither of them remarked on it. The patient recovered and never knew how close he'd come, never knew that a man had walked into the building specifically to watch him die. The gunman was charged, and Dana's statement followed his case. The trained, careful account of a woman explaining to a court that this was a man broken by grief, not a monster, asking, in her flat, precise way, for mercy. She visited him once, before the trial. She did not tell anyone she did. The wing came back to its routine, the way old hospitals do, the way water closes over a stone. The fire door got fixed. The badge reader got fixed. The carts still needed restocking. And on her first shift back, with her shoulder strapped and her ankle stitched, Dana Royce walked in 2 or 3 and found a cabinet running low on gauze, and she went and got the gauze, and she slid the cabinet closed with the flat of her hand so it wouldn't bang. Things had changed, and they hadn't. Marcia Quill, the charge nurse, no longer corrected her. Priya no longer found her hard to talk to, though they did not talk much. Some respect is quieter than conversation. Penn called her Dana now, and he said it carefully, like a man making up for a debt he could never quite name. Cho, who understood the most, said the least, which was its own kind of friendship. But to most of the building she was still, mostly, the quiet nurse in the corner. The story faded, the way stories do. New people came who hadn't been there, and to them she was nobody in particular, the soft-spoken trainee who didn't gossip and didn't complain and watched the doors when she came into a room, and they decided about her quickly, the way busy people do. Dana let them. She had never wanted it any other way. In the back of her locker, behind the spare scrub top, the strip of desert horizon stayed folded and unlooked at. She knew it was there. That was enough. Whatever she had been, in whatever places, under whatever sky, she had carried it home and folded it small and chosen this. The gauze, the trays, the steady rhythm of the monitors, the quiet work of keeping people alive without anyone needing to know who was doing it. At the end of her shift she walked out through the surgical wing into a gray evening, an ordinary woman in an ordinary coat, and the building went on without remarking on her, and that, more than any salute, more than any headline, more than anything they could have given her, was exactly what she had earned, and exactly what she wanted to keep. The doors closed behind her. The corridor was quiet. Somewhere inside, the monitors kept their steady, oblivious rhythm, and the work went on.